One of the descendants of Shem, a man by the name of Terah, made his home not far from Babel in a great city called Ur, in the land of the Babylonians, or Chaldeans as they were also called. He had 3 sons, and their names were Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Now Ur at this time was a very beautiful and very wealthy city, but its inhabitants did not pray to the God of the Hebrews. Many people in those days bowed down to the sun, or the moon, or the stars, or even the great rivers and the mountain tops. The people of Ur made idols and worshipped them, believing themselves to be especially favored by the moon god. Terah himself had forgotten how to pray to the true God of his own people, but he did not feel completely at home in the city of Ur. He was a simple man and a farmer, and city life was not for him. When his sons had grown to manhood, he decided to leave Ur and go to the land of Canaan. By the time he was ready to go, one of his sons, Haran, had died in Ur. So Terah took with him Haran's son Lot, Abram his own son, and Abram's wife Sarai, and his second son Nahor, and Nahor's wife Milcah. Together they journeyed up along the course of the river Euphrates in search of a better land. Instead of turning south and going into the land of Canaan, which the people of today call Palestine, they veered north and settled in a place called Haran in the district of Padan Aram. Terah had been quite rich in cattle and sheep even before leaving Ur. Now in Haran he soon established himself as a wealthy shepherd farmer and the respected head of a growing family that worked hard and added steadily to the wealth. In time Terah died, and Abram became the head of the family, and all the people who had joined their settlement to work in the household or among the flocks. When Abram was 75 years old, he heard the voice of the Lord say to him, "Leave your country and your kinsmen and your father's house, and go to a land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great. Through you shall all the families of the earth be blessed." And Abram, even though he was no longer young and still without a son to help him, listened to the voice of the Lord and gathered his people together. His wife Sarai would of course go with him at his side. Nahor and his family decided to remain at Haran. Lot elected to go with Abram. Abram was glad that Lot chose to make the journey, because it meant that the 2 of them could share the leadership of the expedition. As soon as all was ready, Abram's caravan of shepherds and cattlemen and household retainers traveled away from the great river Euphrates toward Canaan in the southwest. With them they took all their sheep and cattle and their household goods, and they followed Abram and Lot and Sarai into the land the Lord had spoken of. They journeyed on until they came to a place called Sichem on the plain of Moreh, which was in the land of Canaan. Here the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To you and your children shall I give this land." Abram halted his caravan while he built an altar there to thank the Lord, and then went on with all his followers to a mountain on the east of Bethel. Here he pitched his tents so that all might rest a while, and he built another altar in praise of his Lord. Again he moved, journeying steadily toward the south, for he was not a city dweller who would plant his roots deeply in one place, but a tent dweller and an animal farmer who needed to move where the pastures were rich. The time came when the rivers dried up and there was a famine in the land. Abram needed water and fresh grass to pasture his herds and also to feed his people. So he and his train of followers went down into the well-watered land of Egypt to live there until the famine should pass. When at last it did, he took Sarai and Lot and his whole caravan back into the land of Canaan, back to Bethel, where he had pitched his tents before. Life was good to them in the land the Lord had shown them, and Abram became rich, not only in cattle, but also in silver and gold from the land of Egypt. His flocks increased greatly, so that as the years passed he needed more pasture for them, and more shepherds and herdsmen to look after them. Lot also had done well. He too had flocks and herds and tents, and many people working for him. In fact, Abram's settlement was now so large that the land could not support all the living things that were upon it. The family and their serving men lived in a cluster of tents as large as a small city, while the sheep and cattle roamed far into the countryside in search of grazing ground. It became a contest between the men of Abram and the men of Lot to find the best pastures for their herds, when there was really only enough for one group or the other in the region of Bethel. The herdsmen began to quarrel among themselves. Abram called Lot aside and spoke to him about the arguments between their men. "Let there be no strife, I pray you," he said, "between the two of us or between our herdsmen. It is true there is not room for both of us in this one place, but does not the whole land lie before us?" As they spoke, they stood high upon the mountainside, and they could see the land below them stretching in all directions. "Let us separate, I beg you," Abram said. "Choose which way you will go. If you will go north, I shall go south. If you choose the east, I shall go west. Choose what you will, but let us not quarrel." Lot surveyed the land below. Some of it was semi-desert plain and forbidding mountain. Some, to the east, was green and fertile, as well-watered and productive as the garden of the Lord, or the land of Egypt where they had escaped the famine. It was the plain of Jordan, and he knew that he could do well there with his flocks. He also knew that it was Abram's right to make the choice and take the fertile eastern lands. But Abram had offered that right to him, and so Lot took it. "I shall go east," he said, and chose for himself all the gentle plain of Jordan. They separated then, and Lot journeyed into the eastern plain with his family and flocks. Abram stayed in the land of Canaan, content with whatever lands his nephew Lot had left him. Lot traveled on toward the cities of the plain, and eventually he pitched his tents and pastured his flocks near the city of Sodom. It was a good land for a farmer, and it was also convenient for Lot to be near a city of some size. But the men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked, and they sinned against the Lord continually. After Lot had made his choice and left, the Lord spoke again to Abram. "Lift up your eyes, Abram. Look northward from where you stand, and southward, and eastward, and westward. All the land that you see I will give to you and your children, and your children's children forever. I will give you many descendants, as many as there are grains of dust upon the earth. Arise, walk through the land, across the length of it and the breadth of it, for I will give it all to you." Then Abram moved his tents and journeyed through the land to see what God had given him. When he had had enough of travel, he halted on a plain called Mamre, and pitched his tents among the tall oaks near the city of Hebron. Here he built another altar to the Lord, who had guided him and given him so much. He and his wife Sarai prospered, although they did not yet have any of the children the Lord had promised Abram, and were happy with their simple way of life. But Lot had grown to enjoy the pleasures offered by the cities of the plain, and had moved his family into the city of Sodom.
The capture of Lot. The city of Ur in Babylonia had been a godless place, but Sodom was even worse. Its people thought of nothing but their own pleasures and the pursuit of wealth. Nor was Sodom the only city of its kind. The neighboring town of Gomorrah was equally bad. Both Sodom and Gomorrah were known throughout the land for the evil deeds of their inhabitants. These two cities and 3 others lay in the Vale of Siddim, near an inland sea called the Dead Sea, or the Salt Sea. The 5 of them were long-time enemies of the mighty king of Elam and his 3 powerful allies, and in fact had lost in battle to them, and were obliged to pay tribute to their conquerors for many years. The tax was a burden to them, but it was not so heavy that they could not still afford to live in luxury. As long as they could go on enjoying themselves, they would rather pay the tribute money than fight to free themselves. When at last they rebelled against the king of Elam and refused to go on serving him, they were so softened by easy living that they had almost forgotten how to fight. The forces that faced them were smaller than their own, but at full fighting strength, and the war went badly for the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. 4 kings fought with 5 in the vale of Siddim, and the 5 kings fled before the king of Elam and his fighting friends. They turned and ran, with all their soldiers, into the mountains and the valleys, and left their cities open to the mercy of the enemies. The conquering soldiers swarmed into the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, looking for the gold and silver they knew were hidden in the houses of the wealthy, and looting everything they could find in the homes and marketplaces. They took goods and food and captives, and went back to their camp with all that they had taken. And with them they took Lot, Abram's brother's son, and all Lot's goods, and they held him in captivity with many other men and women whom they had taken for their slaves. But one man managed to escape from the enemy camp. He broke loose from his captors and fled across the country to find Abram in the plain of Mamre. And when he found him, he told Abram about the awful battle and the fate of Lot. Abram was a peaceful farmer-shepherd and not a fighting man. But when he heard what had happened to his nephew Lot, he knew at once that he must rescue him. With the help of a few friends who lived near him, he gathered together his band of herdsmen and the servants of his household, and he swiftly formed them into a well-armed fighting force. There were 318 of them, all born to his household, and all trained men who knew well how to defend their flocks and pastures from attack. This time they would be the attackers, and Abram knew that they would fight with him to save his kinsmen with all their strength and loyalty. Abram placed himself at the head of his small army, and went off in hot pursuit of the forces who held his nephew Lot. Far to the north, at a place called Dan, he came upon the enemy camp at night and launched a swift attack. It was so sudden and so unexpected that the enemy broke camp and ran. Abram's forces pursued them almost to Damascus, attacking all the way, before letting the remnants of the Elamite forces straggle away into the hills of their homeland. And Abram rescued all the captives and their stolen possessions, all the men and women and their goods, and his nephew Lot and all his goods. Lot was a grateful man that day, and grateful too were all the people of the ransacked cities. But though Abram could have made himself a very rich man indeed by keeping the goods he had recovered, he would take no reward from their kings for what he had done. Instead, he returned the goods to the people and the people to their cities, accepting nothing in return but the food he needed for the young men of his tiny army. Lot and his family went back into the city of Sodom, which had become no less wicked for having been saved by Abram. And Abram went back to the quiet life of his tent home on the plain of Mamre.
God's promise to Abram. Thus, although it was the custom for the conqueror to keep the spoils of battle, Abram accepted no reward from man. But soon after the rescue of Lot, Abram heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Fear not, Abram, I will protect you and reward you greatly for your righteousness." Now Abram had everything he wanted out of life, but for one thing, and the lack of that one thing was a cause of sadness to him. "Lord God, what is my reward?" he asked. "I still have no child of my own. Eliezer of Damascus, who is the steward of my household and watches over everything I own, was born in my house and is a good man. Should he be my heir?" "He shall not," the Lord told him. "Your own son shall be your heir. Look up at the stars, Abram. See if you can count them. As many stars as there are up in the heavens, so many will be the children of your family. I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur to give you this land to inherit. I give it to you and the children of your children, and not to someone else born in your house." And Abram, although he was old and still without a son, believed in the Lord's word. God also told him something of the far-off future, when the Hebrews would suffer hard times but would overcome their sorrows. In a distant time, God told the faithful Abram the children of his family would be strangers in a strange, unfriendly land for 400 years. They would be slaves to the people of that nation. But when they left it, they would become a great people in their own right, and they would possess the land of Canaan for themselves. And eventually it did happen that the descendants of Abram became slaves in the land of Egypt, and that they left the country of the Pharaohs and journeyed slowly back to the Promised Land. But it would be many years before this came to pass, and Abram himself was not to see it happen. While he still lived in Mamre near the great oaks of Hebron, not only Abram, but his wife Sarai, continued to think about the children that they did not have. Sarai thought about it for a long time, for she wanted children very badly. Even though she knew of God's promise to her husband, time was passing by and she could no longer believe that she would ever have a baby of her own. One day she said to Abram, "The Lord has not let me have a child. Go to my handmaid Hagar. Take her to yourself. In that way I may have a child through her." Now Hagar was an Egyptian maidservant who had become attached to Abram's household during his journey to Egypt at the time of the famine in Canaan. In those days it was not unusual for a man to have more than one wife, or for a wife to give her handmaid to her husband. Sometimes childless women like Sarai would ask their husbands to produce children through a trusted handmaid, and then the wife would be thought of as the mother of the handmaid's children. Abram agreed to Sarai's request, and Sarai gave the handmaid Hagar to him so that she might bear a child. It was not long before Hagar knew that she was going to have a baby. She was proud of it, and she began to mock her mistress because Sarai had not been able to have a child of her own. This was not at all what Abram's wife had hoped for, and she was most unhappy. Instead of feeling like a mother herself, she felt she was a failure as a wife, and Hagar let her feel it. Hagar despised her openly. "I was wrong to do what I did," Sarai said sadly to Abram. "It was a mistake, for now I am despised in Hagar's eyes. Tell me, what should I do now?" "She is your maid," Abram replied. "Do with her what you will." And Sarai was hard on the mocking Hagar. She treated her so severely that Hagar could no longer bear it and ran away into the wilderness. It was not long before she tired and was obliged to rest. She stopped by a fountain of water on the way to Shur, and it was here that the angel of the Lord found her in the wilderness. "Hagar, Sarai's maid," he said, "what are you doing here and where are you going?" "I'm running from my mistress Sarai," she replied. "Return to your mistress," said the angel of the Lord, "and obey her. God has seen your suffering. You will have a child, and he will grow up to be a strong and mighty man who will dwell in the wilderness. Through him you will have a great family of your own. But now you must go back, Hagar. The Lord sees you and is with you." Hagar returned to the tents of Abram and Sarai. When her time came, she bore a son to Abram, and they called him Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old and proud to have a son, even though it was not Sarai's. But Sarai could never bring herself to forgive Hagar or to accept Ishmael as her own beloved son. And it was true that Ishmael was not the child that God had promised Abram. He grew into a strong, wild lad, loved by Abram and disliked by Sarai. And Abram and Sarai kept on growing older. When Abram was 99 years old and Sarai herself, though younger, was past the age when she might have a child, the Lord appeared again to Abram and said, "I am the Almighty God, and I shall make a covenant with you. You have been faithful and have served me well, and you will be the father of many nations. From your children and your children's children there will come great men and kings, and all the land of Canaan will be theirs forever." And because Abram was to be the father of many nations, the Lord told him that his name would change. Instead of being Abram, which meant exalted father, he would become Abraham, which meant father of a multitude. Sarai, too, must change her name. Her new name would be Sarah, meaning queen, for she would be the mother of nations, and from her would come men who would be kings. Then Abraham, who had believed the Lord all the years of his life, hardly dared to believe what he was hearing now. That he would still have his own child was so incredible to him that he laughed. And in his heart he said, "Shall a child be born to a man who is nearly 100 years old, and to a woman who is 90? And he thought of the one son he did have, and whom he loved, even though the boy was not Sarah's child. Abraham wanted good things for him too. "O Lord, what of Ishmael?" he asked. And God said, "I have blessed Ishmael. He too will have many children. 12 princes will descend from him, and I will make of him a great nation. But my covenant is not with him, but with the son of Sarah. For Sarah shall indeed bear a child, and you will call him Isaac. I say to you now that Sarah shall have a son at this same time next year." Yet it was still hard for Abraham to believe, and harder still for Sarah.
Visit of the Strangers. One day the Lord appeared to Abraham as he sat in the shaded doorway of his tent in the heat of the day. The old man looked up and saw 3 strangers walking toward him through the tall oak trees that gave cool shade to the camp, and he knew at once that they were from a very far country. In his heart he was sure that the Lord had come to him in the form of 3 angels from heaven. Whether they were angels or ordinary travelers through the desert, they would be well received by the hospitable Abraham, but somehow he knew that there was nothing ordinary about them. He ran to meet them from the tent door and bowed low toward the ground. "My lords," he said, "if I have found favor in your sight, do not travel on. Stay here, I pray you, and I will have water brought to you so that you may wash your feet. Do rest yourselves beneath the shady trees, and I will fetch a morsel of food so that you may refresh yourselves before you go upon your way." They thanked him and accepted. "Do as you have said," they answered. "We will rest here with you." So Abraham brought them cool water for their feet, for it was the custom that wayfarers should wash their feet and rest them as they paused upon their way. Then he hurried into the tent to find Sarah and said, "Quickly, prepare 3 measures of fine meal and knead it and make cakes upon the hearth." She set to work at once, and without question, while Abraham ran to the herd and chose a calf, a good young one and tender, which he gave to a young manservant to prepare and roast. When all was ready, he took butter, milk, baked cakes, and roasted calf to the waiting strangers, and placed the food before them under the shade of a large tree. He stood by them beneath the tree while they were eating, and when they were rested and refreshed, they talked to him. "Where is your wife Sarah?" they asked, for their backs were toward his tent, and they had not seen her yet. "She is in the tent," said Abraham. "The Lord shall bless her," said one, the one whom Abraham thought must be the Lord himself. "Sarah, your wife, will have a son at the appointed time, as I did promise." Now Sarah stood hidden within the doorway of the tent, and she heard this, and she laughed. Many times before she had heard about this promise, and now it was much too late for it to come true. Both she and Abraham were very old. He was 100 years, and she was 90, well past the age when she could have a child. Therefore Sarah laughed silently within herself. And the Lord, who was indeed among the strangers, said, "Why did Sarah laugh and think to herself that she is too old to bear a child? Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the time appointed I will return to you and Sarah, and she will surely have her son." Sarah heard this, and suddenly she was afraid. How could someone have heard her silent laughter and her innermost thoughts? "I did not laugh," she denied, looking out fearfully from the tent door. "But you did laugh," said the Lord. Yet he was not angry, for he could understand her doubts. Then the 3 men, with the Lord among them, rose from beneath the tree and looked toward Sodom, for it was toward the city that they were making their way. Abraham went with them for a short distance to show them the right road, and as he led them to the road to Sodom, he wondered to himself what their business could be in that wicked city. His nephew Lot still lived there, and Abraham had heard many tales about the growing sinfulness among the people of the town. Again it seemed as though the Lord had heard his thoughts. "Shall I hide from Abraham the thing I am about to do?" said the Lord. "No, because I know you, Abraham. I know that you will become a great and mighty nation, and that you will teach your children and your children's children to be righteous and keep the ways of the Lord. So I will tell you what I am going to have to do. I am going now to Sodom, because the people there are full of sin. The 2 cities, Sodom and Gomorrah, cry out their evil to the skies. I shall go first to Sodom, to see for myself if they are as bad as the report that has been brought to me, and I shall learn if these cities can really be as wicked as they seem. I shall know when I see them, and I will know what I must do with them." Abraham stopped in the road and stood before the Lord. He knew what those words meant. He thought of Lot in Sodom and other men who perhaps did not deserve to die. The two men with the Lord turned away and went on toward the wicked city, but Abraham still stood before the Lord. "But surely you will not destroy the righteous with the wicked," he said anxiously. "Perhaps there are 50 good people within the walls of Sodom. Would you also destroy them with the city, or would you spare the place because of them? It would not be like the Lord to slay the righteous with the wicked. It would not be right, and shall not the judge of all the earth do right?" The Lord felt pity for Abraham and all the people of the city. "If I find 50 righteous people in Sodom," God said to Abraham, "I will not destroy the people or the city. All Sodom will be saved because of them." Abraham thought this over. He felt that he was taking too much upon himself to talk in this way to the Lord of all the earth, but he had to try again. He wondered if the number of 50 was not too much to hope for. "Perhaps there will be a few less than 50, he suggested. "Perhaps 5 less. Would you destroy the whole city for the lack of 5 good men to make up 50? The Lord said, "If I find but 45 good men, I will not destroy the city." But Abraham still felt troubled. He did not want any good men to be destroyed along with the bad. But from all accounts that he had heard of Sodom, it was not likely that as many as 45 righteous people could be found there. "Perhaps there will be no more than 40, he said hesitantly. The Lord was patient with him, for the Lord himself did not want to destroy good men. "For the sake of 40, I will not destroy the city," he told Abraham. 40 seemed rather a lot to expect in a town like Sodom. Abraham went on pleading, "Oh, do not be angry with me, Lord, but what if there are less than 40, no more perhaps than 30? "Then I will not do it," the Lord answered. "If I find 30 good souls there, I will not do it." "Lord," said Abraham, "now that I have taken it upon my humble self to speak to you in this way, I cannot help going on. May I ask what will happen if there are 20 good men found in Sodom?" "I will spare the city for the sake of 20. "But perhaps there would be fewer than 20 good men found in Sodom, and one of them his nephew Lot." "Oh, please do not be angry, Lord," Abraham begged him. "This is the last time I will speak. What if there are only 10? "If there are 10 good men, then for the sake of 10 I will not destroy it," the Lord assured him, and went upon his way. Abraham watched him walk off into the distance toward the wicked city, and then returned to the place of his tents to think about the fate of Sodom and his brother's son. He could only hope that the angels of the Lord would find 10 good men in the midst of all that wickedness, so that they and their city could be saved.